want to follow up with just any kind of loose ends.
Right.
For example, about the contract, what doesn't it cover? Like, can IPs tell the surrogate what she can eat and what she can eat, and is that enforceable legally? And if she eats a carrot that's not organic, can they sue her? This is the kinds of things that people can think about. Tell me how something like that works.
Well, we often see specific requests that are asked of the carrier in the contract through their lawyer, through the intended parent's lawyer. And these
Mhm.
are things that can cause some sort of discord or unease. Carriers want their intended parents to be comfortable and happy. Intended parents want the carrier not to feel put upon, but then they have their own sometimes concerns and idiosyncrasies that they bring to this. So some intended parents are like, you're the carrier, you've had 3 kids, I've had no kids. I'm not about to tell you how to take care of yourself when you're pregnant.
Mhm.
uh, for obvious reasons, those contracts tend to go without too much rancor in the negotiation stage. But then there are other intended parents that are very concerned about making sure that she only buys organic peppers and other vegetables, and they want that inserted into the contract. And the carriers, they try to comply. They're not being difficult, but many times the concerns that we hear from them are, well, what if I go to the supermarket and by mistake, I buy a regular cucumber and not an organic cucumber? Am I now in breach? Do I have to give back all the money? Like what? So it can get into this esoteric range, which can be a little bit difficult for people to manage and control. So we try to let intended parents know what most people are concerned about, to give them a baseline of what to worry about if they're not sure. We have kind of help them along. This is what most people are concerned about. This is what most carriers are willing to do and able to do. But you can't, if you go overboard, then you're going to have a carrier worried about making a bad move every step of the way. And that creates stress and a nervous woman. And that's not what you want for the health of the baby. So there are certain general terms that are part of pretty much every surrogacy contract. She cannot take risks. She cannot travel to far-flung locations. She has to be close to the hospital, a close radius to the hospital, especially in the last trimester, so she doesn't end up in labor and in another county or in another state where the legal work hasn't been arranged ahead of time. Um, so those things are standard and put into most agreements. But what I like to say to people when I'm counseling them as far as how to handle these extra elements in a surrogacy contract is to try to think about deferring to the practice and the procedures that would be followed by the obstetric group that is mutually agreed upon. If you are working with good quality board certified OBGYNs, they are going to have certain behavioral restrictions, limitations that are standard, that are followed by all medical personnel in this, and are not weird or unusual. And in fact, carriers probably had those same restrictions during their previous pregnancies. For instance, limitations on caffeine, no shellfish or raw cheeses, unpasteurized cheeses, things of that nature are standard for all pregnant women. No sushi. All pregnant women have to follow that. Hair dye, for some people, they think that using hair dye can be difficult or potentially dangerous, especially in the first trimester. So there's a limitation on that. But if we try to get too restrictive, then carriers chafe and bristle and wonder whether or not they can actually live their normal lives while they're doing this, and they worry about breach and other problems. So it's a giving up of control. We get into psychological things more than legal things now. It's hard to not tell somebody what to do if you would be careful in that way yourself. You just want someone else to do that. But you also have to realize that they may look at life a little bit differently or been fine with their previous pregnancies, behaving a certain way. So things like no smoking, not being around
Mhm.
secondhand smoke, no alcohol consumption. Clearly, those are standard restrictive
Right.
behavior, and no one could ever agree to doing that, because that would be against all medical philosophy and teaching. So
Mhm.
the carriers all
Okay.
know about that.
Um, have you ever come to a stalemate in a contract?
Yeah,
Yeah.
not often, but we ask carriers whether or not they have any weddings or trips that they know they have to take ahead of time, and we try to work that into the contract, especially in the second trimester when it's probably the safest time to travel. We think
Hmm.
about it like that. But there have been things that happen. Husbands get jobs in other states, and they didn't anticipate that happening when they engaged in this endeavor, and therefore the pregnancy started, and then all of a sudden there's a transfer or a job relocation, and that changes things considerably. That's not a stalemate as much as a change of circumstances.
Right. Okay.
I have had stalemates with carriers who are insistent that they don't want to pay any taxes on this money, and we find that out at the 11th hour. Remember a situation that was pretty upsetting. We always tell carriers that the law is that this is taxable income, and the contract doesn't state the specifics of the tax issues and the tax profile, because that's not something that belongs in a surrogacy contract. But it may state that you have to check with your accountant that we're not giving any tax advice here in this agreement. That's standard language. But sometimes carriers at the last minute decide that they don't feel like they should be paying any taxes on this. And I had a case a while ago where we had to switch to another carrier because we couldn't work with somebody who just refused to allow this to be reported income when it has to be.
All right. But you never had an intended parent who was so crazy about rules and regulations about how a surrogate could live that.
Yeah, I have, but we usually discuss that before we start drafting the contract.
Okay.
Intended parents tell us about what they want. Our surrogacy coordinator, Lindsay Alexander, is so wonderful. Intended parents talk to her about their preferences and restrictions, and she can tell them what carriers will be okay with and what they may have a problem with, so that we can sort of lay the groundwork for this ahead of time.
Yeah, that's another advantage of doing the contract a little bit later on in the process when you know more about everybody. One more question, just a very general question. I know you can't give legal advice, but for those beginning to embark on a surrogacy, from the intended parent's point of view, as well from the surrogate's point of view, what can you tell them? What kind of advice or kind of statements can you give them about the legalities of the whole process that they should be aware of as non-legal experts?
Well, what I would say is be careful about doing online research when it comes to surrogacy, because the cases and the situations that will appear at the very top of any search that you make are going to be busted cases, unusual situations, dramatizations of problems that occurred, not garden variety, everyday happy cases like yours is hopefully going to be. And it can scare people off thinking that, carriers can leave, keep the baby, go to another state. That's what people write about. But that's not what happens virtually all the time. This is not an unregulated environment. It is not the Wild West. Some people have this view of IVF as that, which it isn't. It's very tightly regulated, as a matter of fact, by FDA, by state. So I would tell people that if you are working with experienced professionals, lawyers, an IVF clinic that does a lot of surrogacy work, carriers don't have to be experienced, but they have to be pregnant and have delivered before. Another misconception is, I need a carrier who's really done this a few times to really be confident that she's going to be good at it. No, it usually works against them, as a matter of fact. Somebody who's done this once or twice, been pregnant once or twice, is usually much more enthusiastic. So I would say, be careful about the research. Make sure you're working with reputable facilities, and the legal work has been done for decades now in surrogacy in certain states. So work in tried and true locations. Nobody needs to break new ground and try doing something that hasn't been done before. And you should be fine. You should be all right if you're in good hands that way.
That is excellent advice, Sanford. Well, thank you so much. I've learned a lot, and I think this will be very helpful to people who are new to surrogacy and the law. And also, we wrote an article. It was 2007. Do you believe it? That long ago. And I don't think there's anything been written since. So if I can find the reference, I'll include it in the notes here on the Bloomberg Law Journal on our description about surrogacy and third-party reproduction in the law. And I appreciate your time, Sanford. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kathy. Nice seeing you again.
Yeah.